And tonight, I got the 1972 presidential election, which of course was held between President Nixon and George McGovern. But in this alternate scenario, I got 1968 nominee Hubert Humphrey, who of course was vice president under Johnson. And like I said, ran in 68, but didn't win against Nixon. But like I said, in this alternate scenario, I got if Humphrey decided to run again, then we got him in a rematch. Now, of course, when Nixon won in 68, you had Vietnam, and you had riots and protests and all that happening, and that's what helped Nixon beat Humphrey. And of course, you had George Wallace running as an independent, so he took away some southern states and votes from Humphrey, and of course some from Nixon too, and Nixon still got the win. Like I said, in this alternate scenario, I got Humphrey running in 72, and it's just them this time, so we'll see what happens. Now, these western states over here, I believe Nixon would still win them, being from here, Oregon, California. Let me fix this. Okay. Yeah, like I was saying, I believe Nixon would probably win Oregon and California. Now, Humphrey did win Washington in 68, but you also had George Wallace on the ballot, so he took away a decent amount of vote. But I believe with him not being on the ballot and Nixon being popular at this handling of Vietnam and stuff and law and order that he ran on, I believe Nixon actually could take Washington in this case. Like I said, it was a Humphrey state in 68, but with Wallace not being on the ballot, Nixon being from this region, his popularity going up in 72, and the left running a terrible candidate, then I believe he could still win Washington, even against Humphrey in this case, as well as these other states like Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, traditionally conservative, Mormon heavy. I believe would stick with Nixon, as well as Nevada, all these very rural states like Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Alaska. However, I believe Hawaii would go to Humphrey because it did go to him in 68, and that's gone Democrat just about every time since it's been a state. However, I believe Nixon would take these Mountain West, Midwest tier states like the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma. However, Humphrey did win Texas in 1968 because he had good appeal, like in the cities, and pretty good appeal in the rural parts too. So I believe he actually could win it still because he had good appeal with like Mexican Americans in the state. And I believe, like I said, it could go him. It could be a little closer from the last contest with Wallace not being on the ballot, but Humphrey was a pretty good fit for the state, so I believe it could go him in this case. And I believe, of course, he won his home state of Minnesota. Nixon did win Wisconsin against him in 68, so I believe he did it again in 72. Now, Humphrey did win Michigan in 68 because he had a good appeal with unions and blue-collar workers, so I believe he could take that state like he did in the 68 election. However, these other states, very rural Iowa, I believe would go for Nixon, as well as Indiana and Ohio. Nixon had good appeal with working people in these states, especially Ohio. However, I believe Humphrey could take Illinois because of Chicago. He has good appeal with black voters, obviously, being very in favor of civil rights. However, I believe Nixon would take Missouri. And I believe Nixon would take the Deep South. I believe he would have won it in 68 if Wallace wasn't on the ballot because of his message of law and order and being more moderate on the Civil Rights Act, and Humphrey being more for it. So I believe Nixon would about sweep the Deep South, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. I believe Florida he would win, and of course they typically vote for incumbents. Yeah, go to appeal all over the state, Panhandle, Miami-Dade. I believe it would go to him, as well as Virginia, my home state, always voted Republican up until 2008, from about the 60s, and of course it was like a military state. And of course Republicans did better in the suburbs, so I believe that would go to Nixon. However, West Virginia was a Democratic state, stronghold back then. The coal miners and working class supported Democrats a lot, so I believe it would go for Humphrey, as well as Pennsylvania, a good working class appeal here. Yeah, good appeal in New York City, so I believe that would go for him. However, I believe Vermont and New Hampshire would go for Nixon because they were really moderate Republican states, and Nixon was a perfect fit for him. Now, Humphrey did win Maine, but he did have Edmund Muskie as a running mate, so that definitely helped him in the state. However, since it was a pretty solid margin for him, I could see him winning again against Nixon even without Musquez's running mate. So I actually will give it to him. As well as Massachusetts, been always very liberal. And as well as Rhode Island, it wasn't contested in 68, so I believe we'll go for Humphrey. However, Connecticut is more of a moderate red state, so I believe that would go for Nixon, as well as New Jersey. However, I believe Humphrey would take the rest. Delaware, Maryland, and D.C. Very liberal, and Humphrey was the right fit. I believe Humphrey did lose Delaware to Nixon, but of course, like I said, Wallace was on the ballot, so he took away a decent amount of vote. But I believe if Wallace off of it, Humphrey would get Delaware in this case. Been very traditionally blue. And this is my final map here with Nixon winning 338 to Humphrey's 199. I thank you for watching. If you agree or disagree, just comment below. And just give your thoughts and opinions on how you think it would go. Like I said, thank you for watching. Subscribe and hit the bell for notifications if you haven't yet. And I'll see you next time.